Greetings. It is a joy to be with you in this virtual space. Our church community welcomes you, whether you are new or a longtime member. We especially want to welcome those who are here for the very first time. If you would like to learn more about our community and its online offerings, please go to nsuc.org and sign up for our newsletter. There has never been a better time to get involved or become a member of the North Shore Unitarian Church. We would love to get you connected, and we welcome you today. Let us now begin our worship with music.
Welcome to this spring day. My name is Susan, and I am part of our NSUC Resilience Group. I'm going to bring us together with some words by Evan Carville Zemer. If we lived in another climate, our souls might speak other languages. We might speak oasis or permafrost, dry season or monsoon. But our souls speak spring. Our souls speak green shoots pushing through last year's leaves. Our souls speak flower buds stretching to the sun. Our souls speak mud puddles and nest building, damp earth and worm castings, tiny green leaves and frog choruses. We speak spring because spring sings in us. We gather to nurture our faith in our own growing, our own courage to push through, our own blossoming and resilience, our own small part in the spring of this world. Come, let us worship together.
Let us now light our flame. This flame affirms the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment.
Good morning. Today I'd like to talk about the story of the oak and the reed. You've probably heard this fable before. In fact, it's a common moral tale told around the world. From Confucius to the Old Testament to Aesop, it's a story that has persisted throughout history in various forms and in various places. If you haven't heard it, or it's been a while, it goes something like this. A giant oak stood near a brook in which grew some slender reeds. When the wind blew, the great oak stood proudly upright with its 100 arms uplifted to the sky. But the reeds bowed low in the wind and sang a sad and mournful song. "You have reason to complain," said the oak. The slightest breeze that ruffles the surface of the water makes you bow your heads, while I, the mighty oak, stand upright and firm before the howling tempest. Don't worry about us, replied the reeds. The winds do not harm us. We bow before them, and so we do not break. You and all your pride and strength have so far resisted their blows, but the end is coming. As the reeds spoke, a great hurricane rushed out of the north. The oak stood proudly and fought against the storm, while the yielding reeds bowed low. The wind redoubled in fury, and all at once the great tree fell, torn up by the roots, and lay among the pitying reeds. The message: better to yield when it is folly to resist than to resist stubbornly and be destroyed. During a time when we're all dealing with intense external challenges, remembering to be flexible is no doubt an important lesson for all ages. But I think that we miss something if we stop there. You see, the oak tree wasn't talking to a single reed plant. He was talking to a group of reeds. Furthermore, reeds are special plants. Not only are their stems unusually flexible, but their roots have a tendency to form thick mats. See all of the roots that are connected together? This interconnected community of roots firmly anchors the reeds, even in really challenging environments like windswept and off-flooded seacoasts. You can see this firsthand at the Open Lands Lakeshore Nature Preserve or Fort Sheridan Nature Preserve, both in Highland Park, down the street from our church. There on the beach, you'll see marram grass, a native that has adapted to the challenging conditions along the Lake Michigan shoreline by building networks of interconnected roots below the sand. But that's not all. The marram grass's interconnected roots not only help the plant survive, but it also anchors the entire dune and bluff from the assaulting forces of wind and water, allowing the dunes and bluff to survive, grow, and eventually host other plants and animals. The interconnected roots build community and support life where it may not seem possible. A single reed plant couldn't do this on its own. It's pretty remarkable, and it's all because of interconnectedness. So, my friends, when the hurricane winds blow, remember to be flexible and reach out for someone else's hand. Let's face the wind together.
Our Jewish family and friends, and many of us, will be celebrating Passover this week. And in that spirit, I'd like to offer a reading from the book of the Exodus. It takes place as the Israelites are beginning their journey into the desert. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. And when the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given us to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Each one is to gather as much as he needs. Take an omer for each person that you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much and some little. And when they measured it by the omer, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little. Each one gathered as much as he needed. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no heed to Moses. They kept part of it till morning, but when they went back to it and looked at it, it was covered in maggots and had begun to rot. So ends the reading.
North Shore Unitarian Church is a community that is grounded in love, guided by reason, committed to spiritual growth, and striving for justice. We accomplish this mission through the generous donations of our members and friends. And so I invite you to text your donation now. Please remember that in order to give, you must type NSUC and the amount. Our meditation is adapted from the UU minister Kimberly Carlson. Let's settle ourselves into this space of quiet and openness. Let us feel the gravity of the earth holding us in place. Wiggle your toes as if they are roots. Roots connect you to the earth, lending you strength. Gently sway in the wind, turning your body like the trunk of a tree, leaning this way and that, bending as the air pushes and pulls. What surrounds you may sway you, make you bend and feel unbalanced. Wiggle your toes. Know that your roots can hold you as you grow and learn. A tree is nourished by the soil and water. You are nourished by the food that the earth grows and the water it provides. You are cared for and loved by many people. Breathe deeply. Now still yourself. Know that your roots are strong. Wiggle your toes.
I want to invite you to help me create something of a tapestry today. We are going to do that with 3 threads. The first thread. Lucy Hone stands on stage in a dark, crowded room. It's the kind that we might have been in before COVID in a concert hall or some other place. And there are several hundred people, and she can just barely make out the outlines of the faces in the audience. But you can see enough to recognize that people of all ages, genders, ethnicities, and abilities are in the audience. And the first thing that she does is she asks the audience some questions. She begins. If you have ever lost someone that you truly love, ever had your heart broken, ever been a victim of infidelity, please stand or raise your hand. You can hear clothing rustling and chairs being pushed as people stand up. She continues, if you have ever lived through a natural disaster or had a miscarriage or struggled with infertility, please stand up or raise your hand. Arms and hands shoot up like the stalks of plants. If you have ever struggled with mental illness or dementia or some other kind of physical impairment or struggled with suicidal thoughts, please stand up. This time the camera pans out to the audience of hundreds, and almost every person is standing or raising their hand. She finishes. Please look around you. Adversity does not discriminate. If you are alive, you have had to struggle with some tough times. The second thread. This week, our Jewish friends and family are celebrating the Passover Seder. And this is an ancient meal which commemorates the liberation of the Israelites from Egyptian bondage. We thus tend to highlight it as a story of freedom. But in many ways, it is also the story of great adversity and perseverance. It is a story of resilience. Not only do the Israelites survive Egyptian cruelty, but they go on to wander in the desert for 40 years. We can imagine that time in the desert with the threats of starvation and watching our loved ones starve, the bitter cold that presses against the skin on mornings, and the scalding sun that boils the blood in the noon hour, the sounds of menacing animals and strangers at night. And yet they continue on for the span of a generation, not knowing when or how they will arrive at their destination. Every step of the way, they encounter adversity and find new wells of resilience. The third thread today is from my colleague Nathan Ryan. And he tells this story of his clergy study group. It used to meet at the Catholic Our Lady of Peace Retreat Center in Rhode Island. The original building is an old stone mansion called Hergert Castle. And on one side of the mansion is a 7-story stone tower which had fallen into disrepair and had been closed off to visitors many years prior. The first time that Ryan saw the tower, its foundation was crumbling and its windows were boarded up. But he was most struck by the good-sized, healthy tree growing out of the boards of a second-floor window and reaching up 4 or more stories. Now, he's not sure whether it is still there or not. The retreat center has been sold to a developer. Nonetheless, there was something impressive about that tree. Roots where none ought to be. Roots taking hold and reaching down through layers of human construction towards the earth, finding water and nutrients, finding what is required to sustain life. Lucy Hone's talk shifts focus. After she invites the audience to sit down or lower their hands, she tells her own story. She is a resilience researcher, and she had spent long hours on her work and had begun to offer her research to groups that had experienced a terrorist attack. This was her calling, why she had started down this path of study in the first place. She wanted to be able to assist others who had lost so much, who had experienced gripping fear and trauma, who could not imagine where to find the roots to nourish their lives in this moment of crisis. Her research was intended to support such people as they created the next steps in their own lives. She contributed to pamphlets and brochures that were given to people in these dire circumstances, as well as doing consulting work. And it was at that time that it happened. Just as she was completing her research and sharing its results with others whose world had fallen apart, her own world came to pieces. Her teenage daughter was killed in an accident. And suddenly all of the words, all of the things that she learned and knew, all of the glossy pamphlets and helpful information evaporated as she was left with a bottomless well of grief. While the Israelites were in the desert, afraid that they would not have what they needed, God promises them sustenance. In the reading that we heard earlier today, manna rains down each morning and then disappears like frost in the rising sun. And what's interesting to me is that God explicitly forbids the Israelites to hoard the bread. There's not a lot of explanation for why, except that God plans to offer them more on the following mornings. Nonetheless, some of the Israelites do hoard the bread. And what they discover is that it goes bad. It begins to rot and is covered in maggots when they take it out the next day. I am thinking that this just may be like the advice and brochures that Lucy Hone was given after her daughter died, the same ones that she had contributed to as a writer and a researcher. Though well-intentioned, sometimes what is prepackaged and left over from another's experience will not help us when we confront great heartbreak, grief, fear, and pain. Indeed, in my experience of counseling others in such circumstances, it is rarely helpful to offer them advice. That advice may already have gone bad before they open it and try to utilize it. What can heal and mend in those circumstances will have to come to us from unexpected places. It'll have to come to us from deeper wells. We need deeper resources. My colleague Nathan Ryan continues his reflection on that tree growing so unusually out of that building. He writes that it became something of a metaphor of resilience for him, of the kinds of resources that we need. Resources for when we face personal tribulation and grief, anguish and loss, or when we have been separated for too long by a pandemic, or when racism and violence and mass shooting break our hearts. He puts it in the form of questions. When life is hard, like rock, and that's all you know in the moment, what is it that your roots reach for? When life is hard, like the floor of a rock tower room, like a rock ledge, and that's all we know in the moment, what lets us reach for resilience? What allows us to find the cracks and the fissures and the hardness of life, to reach into them and search for the cool, refreshing, nourishing, life-giving waters that pool in great reservoirs below the surface? What is it that allows us to tap that resilience? Lucy Hone discovered that her roots were nourished by connection. It was not the prepackaged advice that was given to her, but it was the experience of feeling less alone in her pain that made the difference. First, she shifted her perspective from asking, "Why me?" to remembering the larger tapestry of people who underwent great hardship and pain, such as the people in her audience who had stood up when asked about their suffering. This helped her recognize that she was not alone and that there was a community of others who had also experienced great loss. And second, in a more concrete way, she reached out to people in her circle to talk about what she was going through. Availing herself of community and connection has been shown by Hone's research, as well as the research of many others, to be a key factor in resilience. As the American Psychological Association puts it, the primary factor in resilience is having caring and supportive relationships within and outside of the family. Relationships that create love and trust, provide role models and offer encouragement and reassurance, and those are the things that help to bolster a person's resilience. Now, in our congregation, we have a resilience group, and you can find information about that in the newsletter, and you are welcome to attend that because it provides just that sort of connection. No Israelite traveled for 40 years in the desert alone. They had each other, and they had other people who had struggled and suffered and persevered with them every step of the way. They had a community which allowed them to eventually reach the promised land. The poet Jane Hirshfield puts this beautifully by saying, "When people have loved each other, see how it is like a scar between their bodies, stronger, darker, proud, how the black cord makes of them a single fabric that nothing can tear or rend. When we are able to find each other across the distance of our grief, when we are able to open ourselves up to the brilliance of each other's vulnerability and heartbreak and pain, we form connections that no circumstances can mend. We find the scar between our bodies that makes us stronger, darker, and proud. We discover roots that nourish us even when their extent and depth is not apparent. My spiritual companions, may you find the power of such connection and the courage to reach out for it when you are most in need. And may this community always be a place that nourishes and sustains all of us in those times. Amen. I love you, and blessed be. If you found something that resonated for you today, I would invite you to share the link to this service with your family and friends. Also, you are welcome to join us for coffee hour. The link to that will be posted in the YouTube chat and also in your newsletter. But first, by way of closing, I offer some words adapted from my colleague Elizabeth Mount. In ancient times, they said Daenu, which means it would have been enough. I say, it will be enough. If the story of Passover gives us strength to live in these times, it will be enough. If the stories of those who came before bring us hope for tomorrow, it will be enough. If we join together in remembering those people who have survived again and again and against all odds, it will be enough this year and in all of the years to come. Daenu, may our memory and our togetherness be enough. Amen, and may it be so.
הוציאנו ממצרים, הוציאנו ממצרים, דיינו, 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 דיינו. נתן לנו את השבת, נתן לנו את השבת דיינו, 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 דיינו. נתן לנו את התורה, נתן לנו את התורה דיינו, 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 דיינו,